The first time the wagon stopped at the edge of the red plain, the wind carried a silence so heavy it pressed against the chest. Dust settled on the wooden rails, on the tired horses, on the girl who sat with her hands folded in her lap. She had ridden this road since she could remember, yet this stretch felt final, like the land itself was waiting to judge her. Her father did not look at her. He kept his eyes forward, jaw set, as if the earth ahead could swallow what he was about to do. She had grown up under a wide sky where ranch fences ran straight and the days were long. Folks knew her as the cowgirl who worked hard, laughed easy, and never fit the shape people expected. They whispered when she passed. They said she ate too much, moved too slow, took up too much space. Her father heard it all. Each word landed on him like a debt he could not pay. In a world that prized sharp lines and narrow rules, he believed his daughter was a burden he could not carry anymore. The deal was made without her voice. A trade spoken over coffee and smoke, sealed with a nod and a promise of peace along the borderlands. An Apache warrior had agreed to take her into his camp. The men called it mercy. The father called it a solution. The girl called it the end of the life she knew, though she never said it out loud. She had learned early that silence kept her safe. As the wagon creaked forward, memories rose uninvited. She remembered learning to ride before she could reach the stirrups. She remembered the smell of hay, the warmth of the barn in winter, the way her mother used to hum while mending shirts. Her mother had been gone for years now, leaving only a space no one spoke of. Since then, the house had grown colder, the looks harsher. Love became something measured and weighed, and she was told she did not measure right. The Apache camp came into view as the sun dipped low. Tents stood in quiet order, smoke lifting in thin lines. Children moved like shadows, curious but careful. Warriors watched from a distance, their faces unreadable. The girl felt every eye, not cruel, not kind, just steady. It was different from the stares she knew. These did not cut. They measured, the way one measures the weather. He stepped forward alone. Tall, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the calm of someone who did not need to prove his strength. His hair fell dark and long, tied back simply. His eyes met hers once, just once, and then shifted to her father. There was no hunger in that look, no mockery, only attention. It unsettled her more than scorn ever had. Words were exchanged in low tones. The father spoke quickly, as if speed could lessen the weight of his choice. The Apache answered slowly. When it was done, the father reached into the wagon and pressed a small bundle into his daughter's hands. A blanket, a piece of bread. He finally looked at her then. His eyes were tired, afraid, and somewhere deep inside, ashamed. He did not say goodbye. He turned the wagon around and left, dust rising behind him like a closing door. She stood there as the sound of wheels faded. For a moment, the ground felt unsteady. She had imagined this moment with anger, with tears, with screams she never gave voice to. Instead, there was only a hollow calm. The Apache warrior waited, giving her space, as if he understood that crossing this distance had to be her choice, even if the road had been forced upon her. The first night passed in quiet. She was given a place near a small fire, food set beside her without comment. No one laughed, no one pointed. A woman older than most showed her where to sit, how to wrap the blanket tight against the chill. The girl watched the flames and listened to the night sounds, so different from the ranch, yet steady in their own way. She slept in short pieces, waking often, unsure if dawn would bring kindness or cruelty. Days followed with simple tasks. She fetched water. She learned the paths between tents. She kept her eyes down, expecting at any moment to be told she did not belong. But the words never came. Instead, there were nods, quiet gestures, space made at the fire. The Apache warrior, the one she now knew was to be her husband, spoke little. When he did, his voice was even. He asked if she had eaten. He asked if she was warm enough. No one had asked her these things in a long time. Still, fear lingered. She had heard the stories told in town, the ones meant to scare children into obedience. She waited for the truth behind them to show its teeth. She waited for anger, for ownership, for the sharp edge of being unwanted in a new way. But each day passed without harm. Each night, the stars felt closer, as if watching with interest. She began to notice small things. The way he moved aside to let her pass. The way he corrected others gently when they spoke too fast for her to follow. The way he listened when she spoke, even when her words stumbled. Once, when she dropped a water jar and it shattered, she froze, bracing for the familiar heat of blame. He only knelt, helped gather the pieces, and told her it could be replaced. The ground did not open. The sky did not fall. In time, the camp began to feel less like a holding place and more like a living thing she was part of. Laughter found her again, surprising and soft. Her body, once a source of shame, became simply her body, strong enough to carry, to work, to endure. No one here asked her to be smaller. No one asked her to disappear. Yet beyond the campfires and the growing ease, danger pressed in from the edges. Soldiers had been seen moving closer. Ranchers talked of broken treaties and stolen land. Whispers traveled faster than horses. She felt the tension in the air, the way conversation stopped when scouts returned. Her past and her present were both tied to a future that felt uncertain, stretched thin between two worlds that did not trust each other. One evening, as the sun bled red across the plain, the Apache warrior stood beside her, watching the horizon. He told her simply that hard days were coming. He did not speak of fear, only of standing firm. He said she was safe here. The words settled deep, heavier than any promise she had known. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the figure her father had traded her to, but a man who saw her as she was. Not a problem to solve, not a weight to hand off, a person. The thought scared her more than the unknown ever had. That night, distant thunder rolled without clouds, or maybe it was something else entirely. She lay awake, listening, wondering which world would reach her first. The ranch she had lost or the life she was only beginning to understand. As the sound grew closer, she held the blanket tight and realized that whatever came next would test the fragile peace she had found and the quiet love that had begun to take root in the most unexpected place. The next morning arrived with a thin veil of fog rolling over the plains, hiding the world in a gray wash that made it hard to tell where the earth ended and the sky began. She woke to the soft sound of movement outside her tent, the low hum of life stirring in the camp. Children ran barefoot between tents, their laughter sharp in the quiet. Birds called somewhere distant, but the sound was cautious, as if the wind itself carried warnings. The girl pulled the blanket around her shoulders and stepped outside, letting her eyes adjust. The camp seemed alive, breathing in rhythm with the land. Yet beneath that life, she could feel the tension, a constant pull reminding her that the peace she had found was only a thin layer over something darker. The Apache warrior was already awake, standing near the fire pit. He had prepared it before dawn, arranging the wood with methodical care. Smoke spiraled into the gray sky, curling like fingers reaching for the clouds. He turned his head when he saw her and nodded, a gesture that carried more weight than any words could. She wanted to speak, to ask about last night's rumbling sound, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she simply joined him by the fire, careful not to break the silence he seemed to guard so fiercely. It was not long before she noticed the other people in the camp watching her with quiet interest. They did not whisper or point, but their eyes followed her movements. She realized she was learning their language not through words but through actions. A glance here, a nod there, the tilt of a head, everything spoke a meaning she had not been taught. They moved in ways that seemed effortless, like the land itself guided them, and she felt like an outsider trying to step into a rhythm she had never learned. Her father's decision weighed on her with every passing hour. She remembered the look on his face as he handed her over, the way he avoided her gaze. She could not understand how a man could give away his child and yet claim it was for her own good. The memory made her stomach tighten. And yet, seeing the calm way the Apache received her, treating her with respect instead of ownership, she began to wonder if maybe her father had been too blind to see what she needed. Over the next few days, she learned the routines of the camp. Water was drawn from a stream that cut through the plains like a silver ribbon. Fires were kept low during the day and built higher at night. Meals were shared in silence, each person mindful of the others. She discovered the rhythms of work and rest, how the land dictated the pace. The Apache warrior showed her how to ride properly, how to hold the reins so her weight did not tip the horse. He corrected her gently, his hand steady, his voice soft but firm. She had never felt anyone care for her body the way he did, not as a tool, not as a problem, but as a part of her that mattered. And yet, the sense of danger never left her. Rumors floated through the camp like whispers in the wind. Stories of soldiers crossing the border, of settlers angry at stolen land, of old grudges that refused to die. She began to understand that the Apache did not live in isolation because it was easy, but because the world beyond the plains was dangerous. Every day she saw men and women checking the perimeter, sharpening tools, keeping watch. Every night, the fires burned brighter against the darkness, a barrier against the unknown. She wanted to ask questions about the warrior who had taken her in, but his silence often stopped her. He shared details only when necessary, and even then, his words were measured. She learned he had seen war, that he had fought to protect his people, and that he had survived things most could not imagine. Yet when he looked at her, she never saw the soldier first. She saw something more complicated, an understanding, a careful guarding of her spirit. It was the first time she had felt someone could see her and not recoil. She also began to notice small rituals among the people around her. Some wore beads that jangled softly as they moved. Others painted symbols on their skin, each line telling a story she could not yet read. Children were taught to move with grace, to observe without judgment, to respect the land and the creatures on it. The girl felt clumsy in comparison, her own habits awkward against the practiced motions of the camp. Yet they did not mock her. Instead, they included her in small ways, testing her patience, her attention, her willingness to learn. One afternoon, as the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched long across the plains, a scout returned with news that set the camp on edge. A group of riders had been spotted near the ridge, men on horseback, faces obscured by dust and hats pulled low. They had not come from any friendly settlement, and the Apache looked at them with caution. The warrior she had come to trust spoke quietly to the elders, his voice calm but urgent. She could not understand all the words, but the tension in their bodies spoke clearly. The outside world was approaching, and it brought threat with it. That evening, the girl lay awake again, listening to the soft whisper of the wind through the tents. She could hear the faint sound of horses in the distance, and her heart raced. The warrior sat nearby, sharpening a knife, his face unreadable. He glanced at her once, then back to his task. The silence was not empty, it was loaded, awaiting for something unseen to arrive. She realized that whatever she had left behind was not gone, and whatever lay ahead was not yet here. Both were closing in at the same time, and she felt caught in the space between. She began to remember the small kindnesses of her life before this place, the warmth of a kitchen, the sound of a mother's voice, the laughter of children running barefoot through fields. Yet here, under the wide sky of the plains, she saw a different kind of strength. It was quiet, patient, and deliberate. She began to understand that the Apache did not live by chance or fear, but by knowledge, observation, and respect for forces larger than themselves. It was a lesson she had never been taught at home. The girl also began to see her own reflection in the eyes of the warrior. He moved with confidence, but it was not arrogance. He spoke with care, but it was not fear. When he touched her arm to steady her on a horse or to guide her hand in preparing food, the contact was neither forceful nor casual. It carried a weight of protection, a silent promise that she was not alone. And in those moments, she began to feel something she had never felt before, a trust that went beyond fear, a safety that did not demand compliance, a connection that did not depend on being what others wanted her to be. Yet shadows lingered in the corners of her mind. What had brought him to this point? What danger still waited outside the circle of tents and firelight? How long could the fragile calm of the camp hold when the world beyond the plains refused to rest? Every sound made her flinch. Every movement in the distance sharpened her senses. She realized she was learning to survive, not just to live. And survival, she knew, demanded more than courage. It demanded understanding, patience, and the willingness to face the unknown without flinching. The days passed in this rhythm, and she began to understand the layers of her new world. She saw the small acts of bravery that went unnoticed, the quiet leadership that held the camp together, the discipline that kept chaos at bay. She also saw glimpses of what had drawn the warrior to this path, the determination to protect, the refusal to let others suffer needlessly, the courage to face threats without losing sight of the human in front of him. She realized that the man who had taken her in was not just a warrior, but a guardian in a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. One night, the wind brought a new sound, something that made her pulse quicken. Distant voices carried over the plains, low and indistinct, but unmistakable. Riders were moving closer, their intent unknown. The warrior rose, his movements silent but deliberate. He checked the fires, spoke quietly to others, and prepared the camp for what might come. She watched him, understanding now that danger was always near, even when hidden by peace. And she felt a spark of something unfamiliar, anticipation, not fear, a readiness that made her heart race and her mind sharpen. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold, the girl stood at the edge of the camp. Her blanket clutched around her shoulders, she watched the plains stretch out endlessly. The sound of hooves grew louder in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of leather, dust, and sweat. She did not flinch. Instead, she straightened her back and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the land, the camp, and the warrior who had become her guide pressing against her in ways she could not yet name. The horizon shifted, and in that instant, she knew the calm was over. Whatever came next would test everything she had learned, the skills, the patience, the trust. She could not know if it would bring danger, opportunity, or something that would change the course of her life entirely. But she understood one thing clearly: she was no longer the same girl her father had given away. She was stronger, sharper, and alive in a way she had never known. And standing beside the warrior, she felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she could face whatever was coming without fear. The hooves struck harder, closer now. Shadows moved across the plains, stretching long in the morning sun. And as the camp stirred, preparing for whatever awaited, the girl realized that this moment, this crossing point between the life she had lost and the life she had begun, would define her in ways she could not yet imagine. The wind carried a warning, the land whispered its secrets, and the Apache watched her carefully, knowing the challenge ahead would not wait for anyone's comfort. She gripped the blanket tighter, feeling the weight of everything she had carried and everything she had yet to face. And then the first horse appeared over the rise, its rider silhouetted against the sun, and the girl knew that the story she had been living was about to collide with the world she had tried to leave behind. The plains fell silent for a heartbeat, waiting. And in that quiet, she understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The rider stopped at the crest of the rise, the horse pawing at the ground, nostrils flaring. From this distance, she could make out the figure only in silhouette, the wide brim of a hat tipping low over a face she could not see. The wind carried a scent of smoke, leather, and something she could not name. The Apache warrior's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife, a signal more than a threat. The girl noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never left the ridge. The camp seemed to hold its breath along with them, silent as the plain stretched in all directions. The rider made no sudden movements, but the presence alone stirred the air. Horses in the camp shifted uneasily, a quiet warning passing between them. The girl realized then that this stranger was more than just a lone traveler. The speed and confidence in the horse's movement suggested someone used to riding hard and fast. And yet, there was hesitation in the figure, a careful calculation that mirrored the way the warrior had studied the horizon. Inside her, the girl felt a ripple of unease she could not name. Her life had been a series of small terrors, whispered judgments, quiet rejections. But this felt like something larger, something that would not be solved with quiet or patience alone. She glanced at the warrior, whose calm betrayed nothing, and wondered if he knew what was coming before anyone else could even imagine it. The rider reached the edge of the camp and stopped again, letting the horse breathe, letting the silence speak. Then, finally, a voice broke through, low and cautious. "I mean no harm," it said, words slow, deliberate, shaped to be heard but not to startle. The warrior did not move. The rider spoke again, naming a nearby settlement where trouble had begun, where men had gone missing, and where whispers of conflict had grown into rumors. The words carried weight, and the Apache listened as though measuring every syllable against something only he could see. The girl wanted to speak, to ask why the men were missing, why the world outside the camp seemed determined to press in, why her life had been shifted from one place of fear to another that promised danger. But the warrior raised a hand slightly, and she fell silent. The stranger repeated the warnings, and even without fully understanding, the girl could sense the stakes. The camp's peace was fragile, a thin shield over something that could break at any moment. That night, the camp buzzed quietly with preparation. Fires were built higher, spears checked, paths mapped. The Apache moved among his people with the same careful authority he had shown the girl, balancing urgency with control. He spoke to the women and children, to the older warriors, to anyone who would listen, and the words were measured, tactical. She listened as much as she could, picking up fragments. Patrols would move earlier. Scouts would ride at dusk. No one would leave the camp without permission. Even without understanding every detail, she felt the net closing, the tension wrapping tighter around them all. She was not the only one watching. Children pressed close to the fires, curiosity battling caution. Young warriors tested their weapons in quiet corners, sharing glances that hinted at both excitement and fear. And she realized that even in this remote place, fear was not absent. It had simply become a skill, a tool to survive. The camp thrived on readiness, on anticipation, and she had yet to fully grasp what it meant to live within that rhythm. The girl began to notice patterns in the days that followed. Scouts returned with details of men moving through the plains. Small groups, shadows in the distance, always careful, always alert. She saw the way the Apache warrior studied these reports, comparing what he saw to what he already knew. He moved with quiet precision, setting up defensive positions along natural ridges, directing people to paths hidden from sight. Every motion was a calculation, and the girl realized that survival here demanded more than courage. It demanded foresight. She also began to understand the subplots that ran through the camp, the quiet tensions between families, between elders and warriors, between the young and the old. Everyone had a role, and when that role was questioned, friction appeared. She saw an older woman glare at a young man for leaving his post too long. She heard whispers about past mistakes, past battles, and past losses that lingered in silence. These small dramas did not disrupt the camp, but they created layers of tension she could feel even without understanding the words. One evening, the warrior approached her as she gathered firewood. "There are things you must learn," he said, not as instruction, but as warning. He demonstrated how to move quietly through the brush, how to sense when the wind carried more than dust, how to read shadows as though they were maps. She followed his guidance, fumbling at first, then with more confidence. But she noticed the look in his eyes, calm but wary. Something was approaching, and it was larger than the small group of riders from the ridge. Days blurred into this rhythm. Training, observation, preparation. The girl's body grew stronger, her awareness sharper. She began to anticipate the movements of the people and animals around her. She learned how to listen without reacting, how to hold still when the wind carried a sound, how to trust her senses over assumptions. And still, the unknown waited, pressing closer with every passing hour. Meanwhile, news arrived that deepened the tension. Another settlement had been attacked. Men and women missing, livestock stolen, fires burning. The Apache convened a council, and the girl overheard enough to know the implications. The world outside the camp was not just dangerous. It was actively seeking to disrupt, to destroy, to claim. And the warrior she had come to trust was planning a response, a series of moves that could either protect them or draw the danger directly to the camp. She began to sense the weight of choice in the warrior's actions. He had not asked her to participate, but he had not excluded her either. She realized that learning to survive here meant more than following instructions. It meant understanding the world in ways that required intuition, courage, and an awareness that she had never needed before. The girl found herself awake at night, imagining the approaches, imagining the strategies, imagining the consequences if they failed. Fear had shifted into a sharp edge of readiness. At the same time, she began to notice the smaller conflicts within the camp growing more complex. Some of the younger warriors chafed at rules, testing boundaries in ways that could bring harm. Elders argued quietly, insisting on caution over speed, patience over action. And she, caught between learning and surviving, observed everything. She realized that this was more than a place to hide. It was a living organism, each person apart, and each decision rippling outward in ways that could change everything. She also began to sense something deeper in the Apache warrior. He was no longer just a protector. There were moments when his gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, moments when his attention seemed to hold her in a way that made her aware of herself differently. She did not yet know what to make of it, and perhaps he did not either. But it added another layer of tension, an undercurrent beneath the practical dangers that pressed from outside. The horizon continued to grow more threatening. Scouts brought more reports. Tracks in the dust, fires on distant ridges, movement suggesting forces gathering in secret. The girl realized that the world beyond the camp had begun to take shape as a direct threat. The Apache warrior moved among the tents, adjusting plans, speaking quietly, always measuring the unknown. She began to understand that this was a test of everything the camp had built: discipline, trust, courage, observation. And in the midst of it, she was being tested as well. Even small moments carried weight. A child crying too loudly could alert outsiders. A careless footstep could betray positions. She learned to measure her movements, to read the landscape, to anticipate problems before they arrived. And each night, when the camp quieted, she felt the pulse of waiting, the sense that what was coming could not be predicted, only prepared for. The subplots of relationships deepened. Some of the young warriors began to show her respect, some wary curiosity, others hidden jealousy. The older women shared quiet advice, stories of survival and mistakes. Even in the simplest tasks, she found herself learning lessons of diplomacy, patience, and reading human nature. She realized that the conflict was not only with the strangers approaching the camp, it was also within, in how people interacted, how trust was earned, how mistakes could ripple outward in deadly ways. One morning, as mist lifted from the plains, she watched the horizon and saw movement she could not identify. The warrior noticed her attention and did not speak at first. Then he murmured, "They are testing the edges." She did not need him to explain. She understood the threat was probing, trying to measure their readiness, trying to find weakness. The tension in her chest tightened, but with it came clarity. She would not be passive. She would watch, learn, and act when the time came. The camp prepared quietly. Fires were built along paths meant to mislead. Scouts moved like shadows, reporting every sound, every shape. She followed, learning, observing, feeling herself becoming part of the rhythm rather than an outsider. The Apache warrior moved beside her, guiding subtly, correcting without force. And she realized the truth she had been avoiding. Survival here demanded every ounce of attention, every moment of presence, every lesson learned from pain and fear. The horizon shifted again, this time faster. Dust rose on the distant ridge, horses moving in patterns she could only begin to read. The camp stiffened. Weapons were ready. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not flinch. She had learned to stand in the tension, to hold herself steady even when the unknown approached. And yet, beneath her calm, a storm of questions raged. Who were these people? What did they want? Could the camp hold? Could she hold? She glanced at the Apache warrior who had been silent for the longest stretch of time. His eyes scanned the horizon, calculating, waiting, prepared. She realized then that he had never promised her safety. What he had promised was something more enduring: guidance, training, patience, and the possibility of survival. And that was all that mattered, because whatever came next, they would face it together. The first riders crested the ridge fully, their shapes clear in the morning light. The camp braced, every person alert, every movement precise. The girl felt the tension wrap around her like a second skin. The stranger's presence, the subplots within the camp, the unknown threats gathering in the distance, all of it collided in that single moment. And she realized that the story of her life, the life her father had tried to give away, was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the land, to the people, to the warrior who had become her guide, and to the forces that had waited quietly in the shadows. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke, leather, and something else she could not name. And as the horses rode closer, dust rising behind them, the girl understood one immutable truth. The calm was over. The tests had begun, and whatever came next would change everything. The Apache warrior tightened his grip on the hilt of his knife. The girl's pulse raced. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the rise, the first true challenge of this new life was moving fast toward them. The plains held their breath, waiting for what would come. The first riders were close enough now that their movements were clear. Dust hung thick around their hooves, and the glint of sunlight on metal hinted at weapons hidden under rough cloaks. The girl's pulse hammered in her chest, her body coiled tight with anticipation. The Apache warrior stood beside her, eyes sharp, muscles tense under the weight of the morning light. He did not speak, did not need to. Every gesture, every shift of weight, every glance between them carried meaning. She had learned to read him, and in that silent communication, she understood what needed to be done. The camp held still, a taut line of readiness stretching across the ridge. Children were hidden deeper within the tents, the women at the fires keeping low and quiet, while the younger warriors moved with careful precision along the outer edges. Every element of the camp had been tested and trained for this moment. And still the air seemed charged with something more than fear, something electric, raw, waiting for the first spark to ignite it. The girl tightened her hands around the reins of her horse, feeling the animal shift beneath her, mirroring her tension. The riders slowed as they approached. No sudden movement, no reckless charge, only calculated advance. It was a test. The girl realized, a measure of how far the camp would allow the unknown to push before reacting. The Apache warrior stepped forward slightly, the knife at his side, but the motion was minimal, controlled, designed to communicate confidence without provocation. She felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. She had been untested before, but now she knew that her body, her mind, and her instincts would be crucial in what was about to unfold. A single rider broke from the line, moving faster, sending the others into a slower arc like predators circling. The Apache watched him carefully, then gestured to the girl to stay behind a small rise. She obeyed, pressing herself against the earth, dust brushing her cheeks, ears straining for any sound beyond the rhythm of hooves and the wind. Her heart raced, but her mind sharpened, cataloging every detail. The rider's posture, the glint of his eyes, the way his horse shifted its weight. Every small detail mattered. The rider paused at the edge of the rise, scanning the camp, and for a moment the world felt frozen. The girl could almost see the tension in the air, the fragile line holding life together. One misstep, one sudden move, and the balance could tip. She gripped the reins tighter, feeling the horse tremble beneath her, and the Apache's steady presence beside her anchored her. He whispered a single word, "Watch." And she did, every fiber of her attention focused on the unfolding moment. Behind the rider, the others began to fan out, approaching from multiple angles. Dust swirled around them, making it difficult to judge distance. The girl noticed the pattern, subtle but deliberate, a strategy in movement, a rhythm in advance. It was clear these were not random attacks. This was a probing force, testing weaknesses, observing reactions. And in that realization, the girl felt a shift inside herself, a surge of courage, tempered by the fear that had always followed her, now sharpened into awareness. The Apache called out softly, words in his own tongue, signaling the camp. Warriors moved silently, slipping into positions she had not known existed, guided by instinct and experience. Fires were smothered, paths shifted, the tents arranged to create false openings. The girl watched, heart racing, feeling the power of preparation, the tension of anticipation, the fragility of the calm that had held them together. Every movement carried risk, and every second stretched endlessly. The rider at the front dismounted, moving carefully, almost cautiously, toward the camp. The girl's stomach tightened. She could see his hands, steady, the way he measured the distance, how he kept his body low, aware. The Apache warrior followed his gaze, calculating, reading, predicting. And then the rider spoke, words carried by the wind. A challenge, a test, a demand for attention. The girl could not understand the language, but she understood the tone. This was the moment everything could change. The camp responded without noise. Warriors emerged from shadows, weapons raised but not threatening, ready to defend, ready to strike if necessary. The girl's own body reacted instinctively, heart thundering, muscles coiled, senses alive to every sound, every movement, every flicker of light on metal. She had never felt so aware, so connected to everything around her, yet so fragile against the force advancing. The dust swirled thick, the wind carrying the tension, and in that chaos she felt herself becoming part of the rhythm of survival. Suddenly, a distant shout rose, the first crack in the silence, and the rider shifted. The horse under her startled, and she barely held on, her hands gripping the reins. The Apache stepped forward, silent but commanding, moving in a way that drew attention without revealing strategy. The girl's pulse quickened, adrenaline surging, as the lines between observer and participant blurred. She realized now that she would not simply survive this, she would be active, part of the defense, part of the strategy. The air seemed to thrum with possibility and danger. Every second stretched, every sound amplified. The riders pressed closer, the camp responded, and she felt the weight of the stakes crushing and exhilarating at once. Children's quiet whispers, the shuffle of boots, the creak of leather, each was magnified, each carried meaning, each could tip the balance. The girl felt herself becoming a part of the pulse, a part of the rhythm that held the camp together. The Apache warrior moved closer to the rider, silent steps, knife at his side, eyes locked. The girl could see the tension between them, the careful calculation, the balance of power that could break at any moment. She felt her own role shift, her senses sharpening, her courage rising. She was no longer the girl given away. She was part of the defense, part of the strength, part of what would hold this fragile calm together. A sudden movement caught her eye, a second rider attempting to flank the camp. Her instinct screamed, and she called out, the words spilling before she could stop them. The Apache warrior reacted instantly, his presence a wave of force that seemed to bend the moment, directing others, moving with precision. She watched, amazed, realizing that her own awareness had contributed, had made a difference, had shifted the outcome even before the clash had fully begun. The dust thickened, hooves drummed, the wind carried the scent of sweat and leather. The girl's heart raced, her hands shook, yet every sense was alive. The riders pressed, testing, measuring, and the camp responded with a careful dance of readiness, defense, and patience. She saw the tension in the younger warriors, the quiet authority of the elders, the unspoken coordination of those who had lived this rhythm for years. And in the center of it all, the Apache warrior moved with calm certainty, a pillar of strength and focus that held the chaos at bay. Then the first spark ignited, the clash of intentions, a sudden movement that set off a chain of reactions. The girl's horse shied, the camp tightened, warriors moved, dust rose higher. Every second became stretched. Every heartbeat felt like it carried a lifetime of possibility. She had never felt more alive, more aware, more terrified and exhilarated at once. The rider pressed forward, testing the limits, and the Apache warrior met him, step for step, calculation for calculation. The girl realized she was breathing in rhythm with the tension, feeling the pulse of survival as something almost tangible. Each movement mattered, each glance carried weight, each decision could tip the scales. She understood now that the moment had arrived when preparation and instinct, fear and courage, trust and awareness would all collide. The horizon, the camp, the approaching riders, all of it existed in a fragile balance, a thread stretched tight across the plains. The younger warriors flanked, the elders observed, and the girl stayed at the edge, ready to act, ready to move, ready to be part of the defense. The Apache warrior's gaze found hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement, a wordless promise that she could survive this if she held her focus, trusted her instincts, and kept her courage close. And in that look, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense that she was no longer the girl her father had given away, but someone capable of holding the line when everything depended on it. The riders pressed closer, dust thick around them, the air alive with tension. Horses shifted, weapons glinted, the wind carried whispers of movement and strategy. The girl felt every heartbeat, every sound, every pulse of energy in the camp. She was ready, not just to watch, but to act, to contribute, to survive. And yet, the outcome remained uncertain. Every calculation could fail, every movement could misfire, every intention could be misunderstood. The edge of the moment stretched, taut, and unyielding. Then, a shout from the ridge broke through, sharp and unexpected. The rider at the front made a sudden movement, signaling the others. The dust rose, the camp reacted, and the girl felt the world tilt into chaos. Every preparation, every lesson, every moment of awareness mattered now. She gripped the reins, her body coiled like a spring, ready to move at the slightest command, ready to follow instinct, ready to survive. The horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, the riders pressing, the camp responding, and the girl felt herself in the eye of a storm. The Apache warrior moved with precision, guiding, defending, preparing for the moments that would define everything. She understood now that this was the climax, the point where everything tested her: courage, awareness, patience, and trust. And the stakes were more than survival, they were everything she had begun to care for. Everything she had begun to understand, everything that had become part of her new life. The dust thickened, hooves drummed, weapons caught the sunlight. The girl's heart pounded, every sense alive, every instinct screaming. And as the riders pressed to the edge of the camp, the tension reached its peak, stretched tight across the plains. Every second a heartbeat in a world balanced on a knife's edge. The Apache warrior stood firm, his presence unshakable, a calm center in the swirling chaos. The girl felt the energy of the moment, the weight of the stakes, the fragile line between survival and disaster. And as the riders closed in, shadows stretching long in the morning sun, she realized the climax had arrived. The moment of truth was here, every lesson, every choice, every heartbeat leading to this instant. The plains held their breath. The camp waited. The dust and tension wrapped around her like a living thing. And in the silence before the clash, the girl understood that everything was about to change, that the outcome would reshape lives, and that the moments ahead would test courage, trust, and the power of the bonds she had begun to form. The first contact was only seconds away, and the girl felt it in her bones. The world had tilted, the challenge was real, and the moment that would decide everything had finally arrived. The first clash came swift and sudden, the riders pressing forward as dust swirled around them. The Apache warrior met them with precision, movements flowing like water over rocks, his knife flashing in the sun. The girl clung to the edge of the rise, heart hammering, watching every detail. She had learned to anticipate, to notice, to act, and now those lessons mattered more than ever. Her voice carried a warning, a command, a spark that allowed a young warrior to adjust his position, avoiding danger that might have been fatal. Every small action mattered, and she felt alive in a way she had never known. The attackers hesitated, scanning the camp, realizing quickly that it was not an easy target. The warriors had prepared with careful strategy, every position covered, every movement anticipated. Fires created false lines of approach, tents shifted to mislead, and even the wind seemed to bend to the defense, carrying dust and noise in deceptive ways. The girl watched, astonished, as the camp became more than tents and people. It became a living, breathing force, united in survival and courage. The Apache warrior fought with controlled intensity, deflecting attacks without overextending, moving in ways that guided his allies while maintaining his own defense. The girl saw the way he used every part of the land, every ridge and shadow, every uneven patch of dirt to their advantage. And she realized the truth she had been feeling for weeks. Strength was not just about force. Strength was observation, patience, anticipation, and trust. The riders tried to flank, but the young warriors, following the lessons the girl had helped observe, anticipated the moves. Traps they had set in dust and shadow slowed the attackers, forcing them into positions where they could be contained without unnecessary harm. The girl felt a surge of pride, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, realizing that she was no longer simply surviving, she was helping protect, helping shape the outcome. Hours passed in the swirl of dust, sun, and the occasional clash of steel. Yet even as the riders began to falter, the Apache remained vigilant, careful not to underestimate them. He directed the warriors, guiding them with silent gestures, soft commands, and the authority of experience. The girl noticed the subtle shifts, the quiet adjustments, and she began to understand that this was more than a battle. It was a test of every skill, every instinct, every choice they had made to survive and thrive in this place. By late afternoon, the riders had been driven back, their numbers broken, their confidence shaken. The remaining attackers scattered, some fleeing toward distant ridges, others captured quietly by scouts hidden in the brush. The camp exhaled, a collective release of tension that had held tight for hours. Children peeked from tents, elders nodded quietly, and the warriors straightened, muscles still taut but eyes alive with relief. The girl allowed herself a small smile, realizing that she had been part of this, that her courage, her awareness, and her growing skills had mattered in the defense. As the dust settled, the Apache warrior came to her side. His eyes held a rare softness, the tension of battle giving way to something warmer. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "You did well," he said simply. No praise could have felt more powerful. In those words, she felt acceptance, recognition, and the unspoken promise that she was no longer a girl to be given away, but a person capable of standing firm when the world pressed in. The camp began to return to routine, repairing minor damage, tending to the horses, and making sure the children were fed and safe. The elders gathered quietly, discussing lessons learned, strategies improved, and future precautions. The girl observed, her mind racing, realizing that survival was not just about strength in the moment, it was about learning, observing, and building a community capable of facing the unknown together. She felt connected to the people around her in a way she never had before, a part of something larger than herself. That evening, the warrior led her to a ridge overlooking the plains. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and red. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of dust, horses, and campfires. "You see," he said quietly, "this land tests everyone, but courage, trust, and awareness, they hold stronger than fear." She nodded, understanding not just the words, but the depth behind them. She had faced fear, she had learned patience, and she had begun to trust not only him but herself. For the first time since leaving her father's wagon, she felt a sense of peace that was not fragile or forced. It was earned through trials, through fear faced and overcome, through the courage of standing and acting when the moment demanded it. She looked back toward the camp, where fires burned and shadows danced across tents. Children laughed softly, warriors moved with purpose, elders observed with quiet authority. Life continued, and she felt part of it, woven into the fabric of this community in a way that was impossible to undo. Night fell, and the girl sat by the fire with the warrior, sharing a meal in silence. The stars emerged overhead, bright and steady. She thought of her father, of the world she had left behind, and of the journey that had brought her here. She realized that her worth had never been measured by appearances or judgments, but by courage, perseverance, and the capacity to care for herself and others. And in that realization, a warmth filled her chest, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with comfort or approval, and everything to do with life reclaimed. In the days that followed, the camp healed from the skirmish. Horses grazed freely, children ran along safe paths. Warriors trained and prepared without the heavy tension that had pressed so hard before. The girl continued to grow into her new role, confident in her movements, her observations, and her ability to act when necessary. She laughed more, spoke with more certainty, and felt a sense of belonging that had once seemed impossible. The Apache warrior stayed close, guiding without restraining, observing without judging. Their connection deepened not just trust, but something warmer, something that grew naturally from shared experience and mutual respect. She realized that love, like courage, could not be forced or demanded. It grew in the space where respect and care existed, in moments of patience and understanding, in quiet acts of support and protection. One afternoon, as the girl tended the horses at the edge of the camp, she noticed movement in the distant plains. Scouts returned with news. The remaining riders had fled entirely, their numbers broken, their intent foiled. The camp was safe, at least for now. Relief rippled through her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the land was never entirely peaceful. Danger might return, but they had proven they could face it together. And she had proven to herself that she could, too. In the quiet evenings, she reflected on her journey, the fear of being given away, the struggle to adapt, the moments of tension and terror, and the triumph of courage and trust. She understood that her father's decision, though cruel in its intent, had set her on a path where she found strength, belonging, and love. And in that reflection, she forgave him not for his actions, but for the role they played in shaping the person she had become. The bond between her and the warrior grew deeper, quiet gestures, shared glances, and mutual reliance speaking louder than words. The camp, once a place of shelter and training, became home in the fullest sense. Children ran without fear, elders shared stories, and warriors taught skills not just for defense, but for life in the land that tested everyone. She realized that home was not just a place, it was the people, the connections, the shared courage that held them together. Months passed and the plains settled into a rhythm. The girl rode confidently along the paths she had once feared. She helped train younger members of the camp, passing on the lessons she had learned in observation, patience, and courage. She laughed freely, her body strong and capable, her spirit alive with the knowledge that she had found her place in the world. And the Apache warrior watched, quietly proud, his presence steady, the connection between them a silent acknowledgement of survival, trust, and something deeper than either had expected. One morning, as the sun rose in a soft golden light, the girl stood at the edge of the camp, looking out across the plains. The land was quiet, beautiful, and alive with possibility. She thought of the journey she had taken, the fear, the uncertainty, the lessons learned, and the courage discovered. She realized that life could be harsh, that the world could be unfair, but also that resilience, trust, and care could transform even the darkest moments into something meaningful. The Apache warrior came to her side, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "The land tests us," he said, voice low and steady. "But we endure, we learn, we grow. And in that, we find more than survival." She nodded, understanding every word, every nuance. She had survived, yes, but she had gained something more. A life filled with respect, courage, connection, and love. The camp stirred behind them, the fires burning, the children laughing, the warriors preparing for the day. The girl felt a profound sense of belonging, a clarity she had never known before. She was not the girl her father had traded away, she was a woman who had faced fear, embraced courage, and found life in its fullest sense. The horizon stretched before her, full of possibility, full of hope, full of the quiet assurance that whatever came next, she was ready. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the plains in gold and shadow, the girl smiled, turning to the Apache warrior with gratitude and affection. The world was vast, uncertain, and full of challenges, but she no longer feared them. She had found her strength, her place, and her own kind of love. The camp thrived around them, alive with the rhythms of life, work, and courage. And she understood, finally, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The plains stretched endlessly, but she no longer felt small against them. The land tested everyone, but she had learned to meet it with courage, awareness, and trust. And in that meeting, she found something rare and lasting: belonging, resilience, and the quiet, enduring promise of a life fully lived. The girl tightened her reins and looked toward the rising sun. The Apache warrior fell in step beside her. Together, they moved forward into the day, into life, into a future full of possibility. And in that movement, the girl knew she had found not just safety, not just acceptance, but a home where courage, love, and hope would always endure. The world stretched ahead, wide, unpredictable, and alive. And she rode into it with a heart steady, a spirit strong, and the knowledge that she had been given more than survival, she had been given life, fully, and she would never give it back.